So in today's video lesson, our topic is going to be relevance, getting the right stuff. You've already done some thinking about what you want to research. This is our research map, our concept map. And so we know that research involves thinking critically. You've done some thinking about this already. You've decided on your research topic. You have some questions in mind that you've been brainstorming, things that you wonder about. And you've been doing some searching for sources, looking for different search terms, using them as you're looking for information. Today, we're going to decide if our information is relevant. And you can see that that shows up in our circle that says find relevant information. So today, we want to understand that we find relevant information by summarizing our reading and thinking about how information relates to our topic. We'll demonstrate our understanding by reading our sources, reviewing our summaries, and determining which of our sources are relevant to our topic. So in order to understand what we're doing for today, first we need to talk a little bit about the word relevance and what it actually is. This may be a word that we're not really all that familiar with, but relevance is information that is related to your topic. So the information that is related to your topic or answers your question is relevant information. And this does take a little bit of thought to know for sure. When I'm looking for information, it's sort of like I'm trying to hit the target. And so the information that's about my topic is probably somewhere on this target, but the information that really answers my specific question that I want to know is there in the bullseye. And in order to know that for sure, we need to do some thinking. So if I want to know if my information is relevant, how can I tell if the information I have is relevant? There's kind of two big steps to this. So first, I have to summarize. I need to know what my information is about and what it's saying. If someone asks me what this source is about, I could tell them, I could read them my summary and even show examples or evidence from the task. So the first step is to summarize. What is this information about? What is this source saying? And how do I know? If someone had a question for me, how could I back that up? Once I know what my source is about, I can think about and decide if this relates to my topic. So my second step after I've summarized is to think, all right, now that I know what I've read, how does this relate back to my topic? How does it match up with those questions that I had at the beginning of my brainstorm on my research journal? One really obvious example of relevance, if my topic is about football and the source I'm looking at is about baseball, that information isn't relevant, right? It's not really even the same topic at all. So today, our task is to check the sources that we've been finding so far and see if they are relevant or not. Some of this might sound familiar to some of you. That's because we've already worked on parts of this in earlier lessons. So if you need to summarize your information and then think about it to determine if it's relevant or not, we've been doing some of those things. So when we played Outburst, you were brainstorming words that related to a topic, words that were important to it or related to it or relevant to that topic. When you did the jigsaw activity with your class, you read articles and you pulled the important ideas or keywords, the relevant words out of those articles. And then you've probably already summarized the sources that you've read about so far. So you should have some of this already done. So now that we've kind of practiced this in other ways, we're going to look at doing this with our research. So here are the steps that we're going to go through. And this is using our research journal. And I'll kind of walk us through it here in just a minute. But in order to decide if my source is relevant, first I need to look at my source. I just need to pick one and open it up. I'm going to read that source from the red column. As I'm reading it, I'm kind of thinking about what the information that it's showing me. And I might even be thinking about if my keywords are actually showing up. Because the more often our keywords show up, usually the more relevant that source is going to be. The next thing I'm going to do after I've reread my source and I kind of remember what this is about, then I'm going to look at the purple column and read the summary that I wrote and see to make sure that that's still what this article is about. Now that I've read the article a second time, does my summary still match? If my summary needs to be edited, okay, if I maybe missed an important fact or I was off a little bit in what I understood the first time I read that article, then I would change that to make sure my summary was correct. So these 3 steps are really kind of a review. You've already looked at the sources as you were finding them. You've already read them and you've already summarized them. But it's really important to reread your source and check that the summary is correct before I actually make my final decision if this information is relevant. Sometimes when we're researching, it takes a couple times through our sources to really understand what they say. We might be researching something we're a little bit unfamiliar with, and so it takes a little bit of time to learn that for sure. So the very last step that we'll do is we'll think about based on what I read in my summary, and think about if this source is relevant. And then we're going to fill that out in the green column of our research journal. So I'm going to pull up my research journal that I have going. And we're going to look at a couple of my sources, and we're going to look at my summary, and then we'll think about whether this source is actually. So when I look at my first source, as I'm scrolling through, it's talking about what the NFL is doing in response to the research that talks about head injuries and brain disease. And I can see that right here. It has that information right there. It's also kind of asking what the NFL could be doing to make football safer. As I scroll through the article, I'm just rereading this to make sure that I understand what this is about. Here I see some important words. And so this is a place where I kind of realize head impact is kind of like a head injury. There's head injuries. That's one of my key words. Talks about new helmets that might reduce the impact. So that would make it less likely for players to have concussions. So what I know about this source is that it talks about concussions and brain injury, and it talks about that happening in football, and it's talking specifically about the NFL. And when I go back up and look at my brainstorming part of my journal, one of the things I was wondering about is what will organizations like the NFL do with the research they find? Will they change the rules of the game? Will they change their helmets? And I did see some information about that in my article. So when I come down and look at, that was my step 1. I looked at my source, understood what it was saying. And now I need to look at my summary and reread my summary and see if it matches with the information that I found. And so my summary about this article says, this source talks about why NFL players suffer from so many concussions. It also talks about what the NFL is doing to help players avoid concussions, including doctors in the press box watching players through binoculars and high-tech helmets. So this summary matches up with what I just read. I don't need to do any edits to that. So the very next step that I need to do is to think about what this source is and compare it to what I want to know. So again, in my brainstorm, I wanted to know what the NFL is going to do with this research about concussions. And this source is talking about the NFL and some of the things that they're doing. So this source would be relevant. So this source relates to my topic because this source tells about concussions and the NFL. And those are things that I want to know. So this source would be relevant. Then I would repeat this process, looking at my source, reading through the source, read the summary I wrote, and think if this is relevant or not with the next source on my list. So I would go ahead and click on this link, and it takes me to this page. And as I start looking through this page, there's the word NFL, and I know that's important to what I want to know. And I see the word injury, and I know that's important to what I want to know. But as I scan through this, I'm seeing lots of players' names, but I'm seeing that this injury is on his left ankle. This injury is to the fibula. This injury is a pectoral muscle. So this isn't actually, while it's talking about football injuries, it's not actually talking about concussions. So I reread my source. Now I'm going to reread my summary and think about this. Make sure my summary is correct. And when I read my summary, it says this is a list of injuries to NFL players during the football season. Seems right. This lists the players' names and their injuries and when they're expected to be able to play again. This list includes all kinds of injuries, not just concussions. So I've confirmed that that is true. And so this source, as I'm thinking about this, it does talk about football and football injuries. But not only concussions, which is what I want to know. So this source is not relevant. It gives me too much information about other things. And also, I wouldn't really need to know when players are eligible to return to do my research. So my first source talked about concussions and the NFL and what is being done to help. This source is relevant to what I want to know. But my second source, not so much. All right, so now that you've kind of seen the process we go through when we figure out if our source is relevant or not, you're going to follow these same steps. So you're going to open up your research journal, read your source in the red column, and think about what your source is saying. Then check your summary in the purple column and see if your summary is correct. Then in the green column, think about and write if your source is relevant to your topic. Be sure to include why it is or why it is not. In my example, you remember I opened up the source in the red column. That was this, that was this on what the NFL is doing. And then I checked my summary. And then I realized because my article and summary said the same thing, it was okay to decide if it was relevant or not. And because my questions up in my brainstorm were about the NFL and what they're doing about concussions, I realized that this article was relevant. I did the same process for my next article, and that was the injury list. And so after skimming through that, reading through that, I realized that my summary was still correct. But because my research journal questions are about the NFL and concussions, and this source is about the NFL and all kinds of football injuries, this source isn't specific enough. This source isn't relevant enough for me to use. So I went ahead and marked that this source talks about football injuries, but not only concussions, so this source is not relevant. So that's the procedure. You'll open up your research journal, read your source in the red column, check your summary in the purple column, and then in the green column, you're really going to think about, spend some time really thinking, looking back at your brainstorm part of your journal and the questions that you want to know, and then write in just a couple sentences if your source is relevant to your topic. Once you've done that for one source, you're going to go on to your next. And again, that's how we determine relevance.